Hello, this is Kevin Maki, and I'm past president of the National Lipid Association and co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Lipidology. And I'm here today with my good friend and colleague for more than 30 years, Dr. Michael Davidson. And I'm going to let you, Dr. Davidson, introduce yourself and maybe give a little history about your role in pharmaceutical development.
Right. Thanks, Kevin. It's always great to be with you. We have a long history together, so it's been a journey. So I'm a cardiologist, lipidologist, also past president of the National Lipid Association. I think it was president number 10, if I'm not mistaken.
And I was number 20.
20, okay. So number 10. And so my career began with clinical trials. I started a clinical trials organization, Chicago Center for Clinical Research, and then did 1,000 trials. Got very experienced doing clinical trials, and then decided to move to the other side and start doing drug development through biotech companies. So I started with Thera, which was a prescription omega-3. Got sold to AstraZeneca after an IPO, and then started Corvidia, spun out of AstraZeneca, ziltivekimab, an IL-6 drug. That got acquired by Novo Nordisk, and now I'm the CEO of Amsterdam Pharma, developing obicetrapib, for LDL lowering, and we just finished phase 3, and we're moving forward with our regulatory interactions. And I still see patients, 4 days a month at the University of Chicago, by the lipid clinic there. So I love patient care, but I also like being involved in developing new drugs for patients.
Great. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you decide what drug do you look at and say, this is something that has potential and maybe we'd like to develop this. What's the process?
Well, the process for me always, maybe a little bit backwards, was a drug became available, like Epanova, omega-3, ziltivekimab for IL-6, and then obicetrapib for CETP. I obviously knew about the targets and what they meant, and when they became available, then you had to figure out, well, how do we find a path forward for these drugs that have been deprioritized by other companies, and how to figure out how to make them differentiated from anything else, and how to the more practical things is, how do you finance developing these drugs? So all those things had to happen. I think we get into a different discussion about looking at a target and deciding how best to go about that. That's also, I think, where the future is going, is how do you think about what novel targets should be there, and then trying to find what we can do to bring that therapy to that target to reduce residual risk for cardiovascular disease.
Gotcha. And in terms of translating research into clinical application, so what do you see as the biggest challenges that pharmaceutical companies face in moving something from clinical trials into application in clinical practice?
The hardest part, if you're dealing with a known approvable surrogate like LDL, it's pretty straightforward. There's a path. It's a tried and true path for LDL lowering drugs. Now, obicetrapib being different because it has HDL raising properties and other properties, I think, and as a history, that the path, sometimes you need to get outcome data prior to launching a drug like that. But for other LDL drugs, it's a pretty proven path. The hard part is when you're looking at a novel target that doesn't have that that standard regulatory path that we did for the statins, ezetimibe, and the PCSK9s, and that's where you need to have a kind of line up all your considerations. First of all, what is the likelihood it's going to work on reducing cardiovascular events? What is your basis of making that opinion? How much you can support that? And genomics certainly help. Mendelian randomization has been very, very accurate in predicting which of those targets can ultimately provide a benefit. And then you have to support that ideally with really good preclinical models if they're available. And then comes the the challenging part. Can you make a therapy that's ultimately cost effective, and then the regulatory path and the cost and time for that is difficult, and that's why you find in the biotech world, for every cardiovascular company, you'll find 20 or 30 oncology or gene therapy or other disease areas, because cardiovascular is difficult, because you have to, based on where we are now with evidence-based approaches to atherosclerosis and reduction of events, you have to have some outcome benefit established for these novel targets to get them approved. Yes.
And PCSK9 inhibitors are an example of a drug class that had a target, LDL cholesterol, that was well established, and then they eventually showed benefits in outcomes trials, but they've still been underutilized. And so what kind of strategies are you thinking about to avoid that lack of uptake in clinical practice?
Yeah, it's really a very challenging question, because there's many aspects to it. One, of course, is just treatment inertia and getting LDL levels where they should be. I think we're hopefully getting back on track with guidelines, but for a while there, the guidelines were not very goal-oriented, and now they're getting back to goals. So I think that's part of the explanation. The other was, of course, lessons learned about pricing at launch and how they're overpriced, and then the outcome data, because they were rushed, because at the time they weren't certain they'd be approved without outcome data. So they basically designed these very large, relatively quick trials, and so the relative risk reduction was not what people had expected, especially for the price of the drug. So when you have that type of scenario, it doesn't bode well. Now, I think I'm happy to look at the latest trends when the pricing came down, which was just a few years ago, and the guidelines have started shifting back to goals. We're starting to see growth again in the PCSK9 inhibitor class across the board. For evolocumab and inclisiran, there's been nice growth, which is gratifying to see, because that's what we at the National Lipid Association has been all about, is getting LDL levels under control and better treatment for lipid disorders. So I think once we got some of the external factors improved upon, like the costing and the guidelines, we're seeing, I think, better utilization. But it does point to the other factor that I think the best way to get patients motivated more than anything else is ease of use and safety. I think we underestimate how important safety, lack of side effects are, more than efficacy.
So safety and tolerability.
Tolerability, yes, more than even just tolerability. Because in today's patient world, we're seeing a lot more. It's across the board for everything in information, medicine, that there's just a lot more scrutiny, a lot more not trusting the medical system. And so the more we can show the benefit of the drug and then tie that to a safety, tolerability message, the better uptake there will be by the patient. Because right now, there is a little bit of distrust out there. They'd rather not take, statins unfortunately there's a circle of patients that just don't trust the statins and the data that's been so robustly demonstrated. You'd think, that is something that would be kind of a no-brainer for a lot of patients, but yet it's a struggle. And PCSK9 inhibitors don't have the statin baggage. They're very safe drugs, but there are injections, and there's still things that people think about. But I think that if we could figure out a drug that would have less side effects, better tolerability, oral, that could be a real game changer to get over some of that treatment inertia that we face as clinicians.
Yeah, just to provide an example of that, there was a publication by Nelson and colleagues a couple of years ago looking at about 600,000 patients with ASCVD. Only half were on a statin. And so it seems like there's a lot of room for improvement, and we're in a situation where there are many tools available to clinicians but there's still inertia on the clinician side, and then also the patients don't appear to be knocking down the clinician's door demanding to have their LDL cholesterol controlled. So it seems like we've got a lot of room for education of both clinicians and patients, and hopefully the new guideline that's supposed to come out next year will move us back toward goals, because that's something that patients understand.
Right. I'm excited about the LPLA therapies that are on the horizon because in my lipid clinic, at least, I would say a third or more of all new referrals are patients that have high LPLA. They want to know what to do. And so if those therapies are positive, I think we're going to have a lot of people who are going to go on to therapy and get their LDLs better control. Whatever the evidence supports from a treatment perspective, that'll make a big difference, because in my view, at least right now, we're seeing a much more motivated population for LPLA lowering
interesting.
than LDL lowering in many ways. I mean, so that's
There's been a challenge in getting clinicians to measure Lp(a), in part because their view has been, well, if I don't have a tool to lower it, why should I measure it? And I think that that's a bit misguided, because we have lots of tools to lower risk, and just like a coronary calcium, high coronary calcium score indicates increased risk, a high Lp(a) indicates increased risk, and we have many strategies to lower risk, but a lot of that clinician inertia might go away if we have demonstration of benefit for Lp(a) targeted therapies.
I think it's going to happen, and that's why we're excited about obicetrapib, because it's an oral, well-tolerated, lowers LDL, lowers LPLA in some ways even better than LDL, and I think it could be used in that subset of patients that have LPLA levels that are does not qualify them for an injectable, but could fit that like 50 to 150 range of nanomoles per liter LPLA. It's elevated, but not to the point where they need an injectable. So something like that, I think, could be. So we need other factors to motivate patients beyond just LDL. Yeah, we LDL, lipidologists know how important LDL is, but they want LDL lowering, they want LPLA lowering, they want maybe not just stroke reduction, but something maybe to prevent Alzheimer's disease. All those things can be a big motivator for patients. If they knew there was other benefits to these drugs, like GLP-1s do well because you have weight loss, they can see it. In the lipid world, if we did have this LDL plus type of findings or benefits, I think it's going to improve the compliance and decrease the inertia, the treatment inertia.
And what about diabetes risk? So with the CETP inhibitors, there's been some suggestion that they may have benefits with regard to lowering the risk of new onset type 2 diabetes. Any thoughts on that?
It's a big one. I think we see it all the time. The statin diabetes risk is well out there in the social media, and people read the labels, and I think that obicetrapib in the Broadway phase 3 trial did reduce the risk of diabetes significantly. So we're excited about that benefit. It's seen with all the other CETP inhibitors also. So this is why we're excited about our PREVAIL study ongoing. We have LPLA benefit, diabetes benefit, and small particle reduction. So we hope those LDL plus features will then translate to outcome benefits that we can talk about with patients when the data is available.
And what is your projected date for finding out the results, the readout from PREVAIL?
So right now the study's on track. We have a 2.5-year minimum follow-up, which would put us at November, for the last patient enrolled, November 2026. It is event-driven, so we'll have to see. Right now, we're tracking to be about the same time as the study completing.
Okay, great. So maybe we can shift gears a little bit and talk about what trends do you see in the field of lipidology? Where do you think it's going? What are we going to be talking about 5 years from now?
So I think that one of course is what is left to be unaddressed with LPLA and LDL, maybe LDL small particles, and that is maybe remnant cholesterol. Like with Thera, as you and I both know, we thought that was a factor. I think the issue is it probably has to be a pretty substantial reduction probably to translate to a benefit. So that's one target that might still be on the lipid side of things.
And you could get at remnant cholesterol or remnant particles in various ways, one of which is ApoC3. Do you see much potential for ApoC3 inhibitors for reducing residual cardiovascular risk?
I do. I think it's an exciting target. I wish we had an oral, but it's going to be an injectable, which is fine. I think as you look at the pragmatic things about doing a study like that, it's not that easy to find the high remnant patients in a large enough sample size. But that I do think it's going to work. The epidemiology, the genomics, the biology, causation biology looks very all line up for ApoC3 being a great target.
And then we also have anti-obesity medications now that are showing cardiovascular outcomes benefits. In fact, the full paper was published today from the SOUL study with semaglutide. And so what do you see as the role of, say, obesity management and how that fits in with lipid management?
Well, it's overlapping for sure. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, obesity management per se is not. It does have some LDL lowering, but it's not a potent LDL. That's one of the misconceptions about LDL in some patients' minds, many clinicians' minds. If I just lost a few pounds, my LDL would come down. I wouldn't need another medicine. Right. So, but still, they're synergistic with each other because, we have this like this keto diet debate about getting rid of insulin resistance and diabetes, but you markedly raise LDL. That's bad. You have insulin resistance, and you just treat with a GLP-1, and you get that better, but the LDL still stays high. You want to combine everything together to maximize risk reduction with patients, so that they're interconnected, the two. I mean, and that's how I would look at it. You need to look at all factors to reduce risk. The inflammatory angle, I think, is very interesting in that it's largely obesity, diabetes, so GLP-1s help there, but it also could be other inflammatory factors that are important. So I actually, obviously, zoltibecumab IL-6 is on the horizon. Anti-oxidized LDL antibodies, Abcentra is orticumab is another one in phase 2. People are looking at selective IL-6 versus the cis versus trans signaling for IL-6 and how that affects cardiovascular risk. There's other anti-inflammatory NRLP3, even oral therapies for athletes. So inflammation is the other big target that I think is going to be exciting. So you look 5 years ahead, I think aggressive LDL lowering, controlling all the other factors, remnants, inflammation, Lp(a), other vascular inflammatory. We have really all the tools we're going to need to prevent heart disease. The only thing is, the most important thing probably is the will to get started earlier in patients and treat earlier, but instead of trying to treat the disease when it's already advanced, just get started early, and that's something we as an organization too continues to. I know we're on the front lines of that. But that's really probably even more important than anything else, is just getting started early in life.
Yeah, lower for longer is better when it comes to LDL cholesterol and many of these other risk factors. And so at this meeting, I'm going to be presenting results from a meta-analysis on primary prevention with LDL cholesterol lowering. And it does appear that in primary prevention, the relative risk reduction is larger per millimole per liter lowering of LDL cholesterol than it is in secondary prevention or mixed populations. And so we also did subgroup analyses where we found that the lower the risk at baseline, essentially the greater the relative risk reduction. And so this goes back to this idea of atherosclerosis starting in childhood, progressing for decades and then causing clinical symptoms in your 50s, 60s, 70s. And there's a lot of time in there to intervene, and even modest interventions early on may translate into larger benefits down the road.
Yeah, I think Alzheimer's is the next frontier there, because I do believe we're treating way too late with the anti-amyloid therapies, and I hope we can learn from what we've learned from the ASCVD world, that if we just start earlier, we should be very we got very lucky that treating LDL for 3 to 5 years, people with advanced disease had a benefit. I mean, I think we need to learn for other very serious chronic diseases that if you just started earlier in life, we can make a bigger difference down the road. And I hope that's the as I get older, you start thinking about these other conditions that we can make improve upon. And Alzheimer's is a lipid. ApoE4 is a lipid gene, and so I think there's things that we can do. I know LDL, as the Alzheimer's associations have adopted LDL as a risk factor for dementia now also. So I think that's maybe another thing to get patients to think about is not just preventing a heart attack but also preventing dementia. I think can be another big motivator for the patient.
Yeah, I mean, certainly anyone who's had a relative with dementia will be very motivated to do what he or she can to prevent that outcome. And the trouble is that I think there is currently only one sort of certified preventive neurologist in the United States.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work to do. And I think with Alzheimer's disease, we're probably where we were with cardiovascular disease 30 years ago.
Right. So for NLA, brain and heart health, I think is a good, obviously cardiometabolic. We have a lot of areas that we could cover, and we could lead the way on the prevention aspect for all those things that are associated with cardiometabolic lipid risk that you can't get with existing therapy.
Right. And so, with regard to what is next for you, for New Amsterdam Pharmaceuticals, the company that you're CEO of, what do you see as the next steps? Obviously, you have an outcomes trial going and you want to get your drug to market, but is there something coming behind obicetrapib?
Well, we haven't disclosed. We are a lipid company. We have done a great job on executing on our drugs and our trials. We don't have identified publicly any other new drugs that we're working on, but we're thinking about those kind of things. But we do have obicetrapib and obicetrapib with ezetimibe, and we're trying to expand upon what that drug can mean for multiple benefits. The ezetimibe combo I'm especially excited about because it puts us in a LDL lowering range of the injectables or the oral PCSK9s that are coming, but also the anti-atherogenic effects of the combination. It looks really promising preclinically. That's why we're excited about the Rembrandt study, which is a non-calcified plaque volume as an endpoint, which is getting back to our drug development discussion. We need better surrogates. I'm hoping no one's ever done a true intervention study with an investigational drug for non-calcified plaque. We hope this can become a really good surrogate for drug development in the future.
And where would you see that? So let's say we have trials that demonstrate non-calcified plaque progression reduction. Where do you see that fitting in the drug development process?
I think it's a great phase 2 type study before you de-risk an outcome study, especially if Rembrandt study works, which we hope it does. It's designed for success. If we can't, the only thing the LDL lowering is going to be very robust, and that we already have outcome indicators in Broadway. So now we have to have a non-calcified plaque volume imaging surrogate hold up, which I think it's going to. We have enough other evidence that it will, but it does hold up in the Rembrandt trial. Then I think that could be used again. We'll have a proof of concept really for a lot of other drugs that can go into phase 2 with that type of imaging modality for benefit.
Do you envision a time when a drug will be able to obtain approval? Maybe, not something that is targeting an established surrogate like LDL cholesterol, but where a drug might be able to get approval pending the results of an outcome study on the basis of imaging results.
I hope so. I've been working that for my entire career, trying to find surrogates of imaging because we realize, this again, looking towards the future. When we have all these therapies available, that's great. You're improving care, but then how do you do an outcome study when you have to have all these other things on board? How can you determine incremental benefit? And that's going to be really hard. These are big studies already, and long and big. And the more therapies already approved, like for Prevail, just because of the ethics of it, the background therapy includes not just high-intensity statins, but ezetimibe, PCSK9 inhibitors. So we're already talking about people that are on other drugs extensively. So you have to show a benefit on top of that. And that's where it gets hard. And I think we need to have these surrogates available for future development that everyone agrees upon are going to translate into clinical benefits ultimately. I think we put a lot of hardship on ourselves, challenges to make everyone evidence-based on outcomes. It's a tough road to hoe for a lot of things that are very exciting, novel targets that I wish we had an easier way to give them to patients a lot quicker.
Right, and now we've got something like a dozen classes of drugs that have shown cardiovascular outcomes benefits. And so when you're talking about treating people who are already on multiple cardioprotective therapies, showing that incremental benefit means huge sample sizes, long follow-up periods. And so de-risking is important, having confidence before the funds are invested to run a trial, but also I'm very hopeful that we'll get to a point where we can get drugs to the clinic sooner on the basis of surrogate markers that have been proven.
It has to be the future. I mean, we just can't keep doing these outcome. Now, you and I have both talked about how to make outcome studies easier. We've written papers on that. Total events, taking people only on drug, on treatment, things that we can do to take some of the hardship off of the trial itself. But that is not, so far, you can't get the purists to agree to those type of study designs.
Well, anything else you'd like to talk about today before we wrap it up?
It's been great, Kevin. I'm excited about where the field is right now. I want to say, as a lipidologist, I think about what I did, a decade ago, what I'm doing now, and with the tools that we have, new drugs coming, these great drugs, LPLA, and other exciting targets, inflammation, and we have better imaging modalities. We have better biomarkers. I love genomics. I do it almost all my patients to assess understanding. And for me, every patient is an interesting learning experience. And so I think it's no better time to be a lipidologist, treating lipidologist, because all the exciting things we have accomplished and all the things that are in the pipeline. So it could not be a better time for us to be involved in this field.
Absolutely. I can second that. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. And I'm sure that the listeners will be very interested in the conversation that we had.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. It's great. Thank you.